Okay, I think we can get going. So a very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for attending this Space Infrastructure Hub user requirement session. I will get into the agenda and talk in a little bit more detail about what we're hoping to achieve today. But I thought before that we could introduce at least the panelists. Unfortunately, we're too big to allow a fully open session. Anyway, so my name is Stuart Bernard. I'm a Chief Scientist in Earth Observation at SANSA, and I'll be running the session. I see we have Elon Musk here. Welcome, Elon. Thanks. Good to have you. So I'll just allow the SANSA and CUI team, please, to introduce themselves, and then we'll go through the panelists, and then Lulu from NEOS would just like to say a few words on that. So Imran, maybe we could just start with you, please.
Good morning, everyone. Imran Saluji from the Earth Observation Division in SANSA. I'm the Chief Sector and Business Developer.
Okay, and Kumbulani, please.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Kumbulani Mkize, Marketing Specialist within SANSA Earth Observation. Thank you.
Okay, good. Shangani from CUI, please.
Morning, everyone. My name is Shangani Mboweni, and I'm a Senior Analyst at CUI Studios.
Okay, Yolanda, please.
Morning, everyone. My name is Yolanda Mbelu, and I'm an Operations Analyst at CUI Studios.
Thanks, Yolanda. And Nduduzo?
Morning, everyone. My name is Nduduzo Matsenjwa. I'm a Technology and Innovation Analyst at CUI Studios.
Okay, great. So maybe I can then ask the panelists just to briefly introduce themselves. Lulu, if it's okay, can we start with you, and maybe you can just say a few words from a NEOS perspective, please.
Okay, no, thank you so much, Stuart, and greetings, everyone. Compliments of this new year. I'm just excited and honored that as we begin this year, we begin already, excited about, I think, the space and Earth observations. So Lulu Makapela from the, I currently work as the Strategic Initiatives Contracts Manager at the CSIR, and responsible for the National Earth Observations and Space Secretariat. I know quite a few of you might know about it. It's been a program that has been there, I think, since the establishment of the SANSA as well. I think just before the establishment of SANSA, and we have resuscitated it. This is an initiative of the Department of Science and Technology, so it's not a legal entity, whether by cooperation or by statutory means. But it is a very great initiative which seeks to ensure that we actually I think implement the SIOS, the National Space Science and Technology Strategy, especially ensuring that the communities, the various communities, which include SANSA, all the stakeholders in Earth observations, actually maximize the investment in Earth observations and space through coordination of South Africa's EO capacities. So I think from my side, we have a workshop next week, and we are happy we are part of this user requirements workshop, but we would like to let you know that next week we have, we have the communities of practice, 6 in particular, that have been established, and some of them touch some of the areas that are on the agenda today, Dr. Stuart Bernard, which is quite exciting. And that session will be mainly focusing on, I think, planning, seeing what these communities are going to do for the next 2 years, and we are excited about that. So thank you for the time, Stuart. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Lulu. So Dr. Abel Ramoelo from the University of Pretoria. Abel, maybe please introduce yourself quickly.
Yes, thanks, Stuart. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Abel Ramoelo. I'm from the University of Pretoria. I'm the director for the Center for Environmental Studies under the Department of Geography, Geoinformatics, and Meteorology. Really keen and looking forward to this workshop and any engagement that will transpire thereof. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Abel. Declan Pillay from NDMC. Good to have you, Declan. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Stuart. Good morning, colleagues. Let me just adjust here. My name is Declan Pillay from the National Disaster Management Center, and I head up the ICT unit there and also the GIS spatial component. Thank you for the invitation to this workshop. Let's see how we can make it worthwhile in terms of impactful usage of satellite imagery for disaster management. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Declan. And our final panel member at the moment is Gabby Janse van Rensburg from Council for Geoscience. Please, Gabby.
Morning, everyone. I'm Gabby Janse van Rensburg, and I'm representing the Council for Geoscience today. I'm within the Geophysics and Remote Sensing Department, and I will be representing the minerals and geoscience components of this session. So I'm excited to contribute to the discussion and to hearing what everybody else has got to say. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Gabby. Okay, so before I start with the session, please note that you can either use the chat box or preferably the chat for, let's say, more kind of logistical kind of things. And please use the Q&A box to post any questions. And hopefully Lulu will post the details for the NEOS workshop either in the chat or the Q&A. We'll try and keep it fairly informal. We've got an introductory session, and then we'll go into some Jamboards with appropriate breaks to get information from you. So I am just going to start with that. Okay, are we all seeing this okay and hearing me?
Yes, Stuart.
Good. Okay. All right. So the agenda looks something like this. We've had our opening and welcome. We're going to go through, what we're actually trying to achieve and why we're all here, and what SANSA is trying to get out of this. Go through a little bit more detail on the Space Infrastructure Hub, briefly what it is, and then have a look at the emerging user requirements. And most of these have come either from previous user requirements, but primarily from engagement with what we call the expert advisory groups across thematic areas. And we'll try and allow plenty of time for Q&As around that for clarity. We'll then go and introduce you to the Jamboards, which are basically kind of online whiteboards that we use to actually gather your information and thinking, which is obviously a very important part of today. And we'll then have a break, and we'll then have short 10-minute sessions across each thematic area that you see there. And obviously in 10 minutes, we can't do too much, but we'll just try and gather the kind of headline thinking and at least some idea of what the community is seeing as priorities in terms of the user requirements across these thematics. Then we'll also, Herman will be posting a Zoom survey sometime shortly. It's not very complicated. There's about 8 questions. We just ask you what your main thematic interests are, and then across optical, synthetic aperture radar, and thermal, try and get some idea of where you see the main priorities. And if you'd like a bit of kind of technical clarity on what those questions actually mean in terms of the kind of products, then just let us know and we'll try and explain in a bit more detail. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why we're here. And the main reason why we're here is that we are developing the framework for a new space infrastructure hub. So this is a large investment in space infrastructure, and the thematic user requirements, which are really the end user requirements for the information systems, are one of the key components in that. So this defines effectively both the mission and the program. So as I said, we've already had 9 expert advisory groups, including security, which I won't discuss too much here for obvious reasons. And we now want to take the emerging thinking that's coming from that and get feedback from the regional community on that. And I know that we have attendance both from South Africa across government, the R&D community, industry, but we also have attendance from the region and internationally as well. So, you know, please feel free to comment as much as possible. We would really like to get your thinking. Okay, so the Space Infrastructure Hub, it started with a proposal to government around strategic infrastructure, and this was accepted and gazetted. So this is now SIP 22. It's intended to be about 4.5 billion. This will go into new missions, new ground infrastructure. By new missions, I mean new Earth observation spacecraft, but also very much into the downstream information systems and all of that entails. And the key thing to realize is the SIH is very externally facing, and it's really designed to benefit all of South Africa and to kind of create distributed benefits. So, and these thematic requirements, as I've said, they're a critical part of that, of the development of the SIH. So I'll just quickly go through the kind of nomenclature, so just so we have clarity on that. So when I say upstream, I effectively mean satellites. And obviously this primarily relates to the space industry. And those missions, the upstream and the missions, will have their own requirements, which we're not going to go into detail here because those will follow from the user requirements. The midstream relates to a fairly technical part of actually receiving the data on the ground and making sure that it can be have value added to it. And then we look at the downstream in terms of 2 parts, one of which is the kind of EO specialists, and I think many people here will form part of the intermediate downstream. That will have its own requirements, and by ecosystems we basically mean the whole value chain, for example, for something like agriculture, from the time the satellite data are received through to end user decision making. And then right at the end of the value chain, and a very important part of it obviously, are the use of these EO products and services, and we hope in many cases these are used by non-EO experts. And that's primarily what we'll be focusing on today, although we will be looking at the missions. Okay, so the infrastructure hub, this is a very kind of simple conceptual diagram. You know, we have new missions, which will be defined in the next few months. Of course, we're not starting from scratch, and we'll very definitely be making use of the wide variety of sensors that we currently use, which might include, Sentinel satellites from Copernicus, Landsat, Seabirds, RadarSat, etc., etc. And then all of those go into these ecosystems with different components, R&D components. So Neo Frontiers, we hope to make some announcements about that. The first funding tranche from that in the coming weeks. You know, industry support programs, and then finally getting to the stage where we're getting to kind of public service support. So this might include existing examples. This would include things like OSIMs or APHIS, so Ocean and Fire Services, across the upstream down to the end of the downstream. So the requirements process looks something like this. We are split into 9 preliminary thematic sectors, including defense, which we're not going to deal with here. We came up with some draft requirements, and we had our thematic expert advisory group meetings. And we're now looking at taking what are still very much emerging, what is very much emerging thinking from that, and showing it to the community with a kind of first order synthesis and getting further feedback from the community. And then we see this user requirement being made publicly available as a community resource, probably in the middle of this year. And as I've said, the importance of these requirements is that because they tell us exactly how the end users find value from Earth observation and value-added products, they then inform both the upstream in terms of what new missions we're looking at, but also the downstream and the kind of information systems that the community needs built to find that value. And it necessarily has to be quite forward-looking. So part of the expert advisory group value is to help us to kind of sketch out future scenarios. And we've been focusing on 3 aspects of that. One is the downstream. So for example, if we don't have any new sensors and we're building new information systems around existing sensors, what are the highest priorities? How do we find value in that? And that's this new downstream capabilities. But I'm sure all of you will know that increasingly in the world of big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning, that we're trying to actually bring much more value to the product or time series of products or multi-sensor products or merged Earth observation and model products. So we also in our scenarios want to look at, you know, what are the predictive capabilities that are necessary to bring more value to the end user. And then finally, the upstream missions. So this is really, without getting into technical detail, and mostly looking at time, space, and minimum kind of spectral or similar requirements to say, okay, you know, where are the kind of innovation spaces and new value spaces for potential new missions. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is just an example of the input we got from the agriculture expert advisory groups. And I'm showing you this for 2 reasons. One, so you can see the type of information that we were asking for. But secondly, you can see what kind of information was considered of the highest priority. And I'm showing you one expert advisory group because we obviously don't have the time or even the interest, I think, to go through and look at them all in detail. So I'm showing you one as an example, and then we'll go to a synthesis of the thinking from most of the other advisory groups. Okay, so we started off, and we'll do the same here, with some kind of, and this was a bit of fun in some ways, but also gives us some valuable information to say, well, you know, in 10 years' time, what are the headlines? You know, is it new technology or new impact, economic impact, societal impact, etc.? And you can see here, we were getting everything from, you know, drones to, you know, new farming products, to small scale farmers, to, you know, increases in GDP based upon the technology, to new e-commerce capabilities, etc. So we then looked at the downstream capabilities, and again, we got quite a wide range of thinking here, from obviously, decision support tools, which is mostly where the downstream is existing, extension services, new drone technology, better products, etc. I'm not going to go into the detail. It's just to give you a kind of a brief idea of the kind of things that we were receiving. And again, on the intelligence, on the predictive, a lot of focus on artificial intelligence, change detection, better feature extraction, using machine learning to look at crop decision making across time and space, new models for hyperspectral, etc. So again, spanning a range from the more technical to the very end user aspect. Now, I just want you to look at this briefly, and this was our way of trying to say, well, for new missions, how do we find value? And what you have here is effectively a spatial resolution, which is typically what is the spatial resolution of 1 pixel on the ground, which is a very conventional measure for satellites. And this is for optical missions, which probably most of you will be most familiar with. So, for example, Sentinel-2, which probably most of you are most familiar with, would occupy a space around about here, 20 odd meters, typically every 5 days. And you can see in agriculture, there was basically a split between kind of workhorse climate change type detection at a larger spatial resolution, but most of the requirement was, getting close to daily and under 10 meter resolution for a variety of the most important applications. And we'll also be asking for your inputs using a similar diagram. This is a little bit more complicated and is a bit more technical, but basically this looks at the spectral aspects. So we go here from panchromatic means a single color, a kind of grayscale, and typically this is a higher resolution. RGB means more like Planet Labs. So you do have a few colors, but you're not doing anything sophisticated. You're not doing an atmospheric correction. So this is typically kind of higher resolution image-based satellites. And then we get into multispectral with AC. AC is not air conditioning, believe it or not. It's plenty cold up there already. It's an atmospheric correction. So this means higher precision radiometry that can be translated into geophysical products like biomass, for example. And then you get to what is very much an emerging aspect, which is hyperspectral. So this is hundreds of bands, very fine spectral resolution that potentially allows you, if you've got the correct algorithms, etc., to extract typically quite a lot more information about what is there. We also looked at thermal missions, and there are some emerging thermal missions. You probably can't see this, sorry about that. But at the moment, for example, if you want thermal information, you can either get it on a daily basis from things like VIIRS, but at a 750 meter resolution. You can get thermal data from Landsat, but unfortunately only every couple of weeks at 100 meter resolution. But there are new constellations that are looking at sub 100 meter kind of daily thermal data, and that we'll go into that in a bit more detail, but that potentially has very high innovation value. Okay, and then the last type of sensor we looked at was synthetic aperture radar. I'm afraid I'm not going to go into the detail of what that is if you're not sure what it is, but obviously it's a type of radar. It comes in various flavors depending upon the wavelength. And the request from agriculture was to look at soil moisture, biomass, yield, typically using what's called an L band. Okay. And then finally, the research capabilities. Some of you may have been in the Neo Frontiers workshop in December. So we're not going to go into the research capabilities very much here, but obviously, if you have specific downstream and intelligence needs, the research is the thing, the R&D is the mechanism that you use to actually realize those capabilities. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, Imran, please just let me know if there are any questions that I should kind of interrupt things for. I'm just happily going forward here, and I can't really see the Q&A in the chat. So.
None that I can see at the moment. I think there was one from Siva Kumar about the difference between this workshop and the previous ones.
The expert advisory groups.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you're about to see that because you're going to start seeing the first order synthesis now. So let's revisit that question after this bit. So what I'm going to do now is start showing you, because obviously people who might have attended the expert advisory groups will have only seen one thematic area and some thinking on the fly, and we're now starting to see a greater synthesis. So if, for example, we look across these thematic areas and we start to see what are the primary solution spaces for new missions. So we can see that there's obviously a demand for very high resolution data without that much spectral information, primarily from the built environment. So that's a clear space. Whether SIH will be building missions to fulfill that space, I'm not sure, because that is a specific kind of technology. We can also see that at the high resolution to very high resolution, there are quite a few thematic areas with a strong need there, which relate from, the very high precision agriculture to things like mapping kelp beds and mangroves in marine and maritime, obviously built environment, to kind of species level detection and ecosystems, and obviously for disaster management, things like floods, etc. But one of the areas where we're seeing a massive demand across pretty much all of the thematics, apart from atmospherics, is in this kind of 3 to 5 meter resolution, approaching daily, a multispectral sensor with 10 bands, something like that. And this was very interesting to us because there was a very clear outcome from all of the expert advisory groups that this was seen as a very high value domain. And we then also had, this is quite a wide range of sensors here, but once we start getting to multi and hyperspectral with a lot of spectral information and something like a daily revisit time, there was also quite a well-expressed need in that domain. And that was more to look at the kind of climate change monitoring, so longer term monitoring of ecosystems, etc. And then obviously in the marine and aquatic domains, you've got more specific requests there because those domains and optical, with regard to optical thematics, operate at a typically lower resolution where the value is found. Excuse my dog. And then there's a much lower spatial resolution, but very frequent revisit requirement across primarily the atmosphere and marine and maritime, which is potentially reasonably well serviced by existing sensors. Okay, so this is the main synthesis we're seeing at the moment from the expert advisory groups for optical missions. I'm showing you this because this actually came from the built environment, and the built environment has quite specific higher resolution requirements. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but we were very interested in typically the split between below 1 meter and above 1 meter, because this is typically where you need a different kind of technology, larger satellites, more expensive sensors. So it's very useful for us to figure out what kind of needs need to be serviced at, for example, 0.5 meter, and what can be serviced by above 1 meter. And you can see there are specific needs that, for example, in the past have been met by aerial surveys at 25 centimeter resolution in the built environment. But there are quite a lot of, there's a lot of value to be found in the kind of 1 to 3 meter type range. And that was very interesting for us because that's a technological need that we think we could meet. Okay, spectrally, again, I'm not going to go into this in huge detail, but similarly to what I've already discussed, the kind of panchromatic and RGB, i.e. simple spectral sensors working at a high resolution, this is mostly required by built environment and disaster management. So no real surprises there. The kind of workhorse sensors were seen to be in this multispectral. So, you know, it's typically something like Sentinel-2, but a bit more resolution and a bit more often, please. And these were seen as the kind of primary multi-thematic workhorses. So this is typically still fairly high precision radiometry. We didn't get into the technical details, but certainly you'd be looking at SNRs of maybe 150 plus at a native resolution, you know, 10 to 12 bands, atmospheric correction bands, etc. There was hyperspectral was seen as very valuable at a typically lower spatial resolution, revisit of every few days. And the primary value was seen in extracting greater information, for example, about species type across terrestrial, aquatic, marine ecosystems. So very much in agriculture, water, ecosystems, marine and maritime, etc., and energy and minerals, of course, too. There was an interesting aspect that we came across, which was that a lot could be done with what I've called innovative multispectral. In other words, if we go and configure sensors with very carefully selected bands, I've used the examples of the red edge and fluorescence zones, that could have a good deal of innovation, could give similar returns to hyperspectral, maybe even better, depending on the technical aspects. And that was certainly something we should be looking at. And there was a very strong request for SWIR bands. So, you know, that's going up to 1300 plus nanometers for a variety of applications. Okay, the thermal synthesis, I'm just going to keep it very simple. Basically, there was a very, very strong expression of interest at typically about a 50 meter ground resolution and pushing as close to daily as possible. And it was felt that this, for soil moisture, urban heat maps, you know, aquatic and coastal monitoring, really across many of the thematics, there was a very strong expression of interest. Okay, and then finally, the synthetic aperture radar. We will make these slides available afterwards, so, you know, please don't worry if you're missing anything. You know, I don't want to go and dig too deep in this, but you'll see that across X band, which is typically the highest resolution, C band, which is the next lowest, and L band. So an example of the existing sensors like that, for example, might be X band. Many of the new space, ISI, Capella, SAR constellations operate in X band because it gives the highest resolution for things like surveillance. C band we've used a lot in the past, so people have used Sentinel-1 or radar sat data under OSIMs is C band, and then L band is a slightly longer wavelength that is seen as very useful to look at, for example, terrestrial vegetation, whether it's agricultural or forest and ecosystems. So there was very strong expression of interest, obviously, in SAR for all the thematics, other than atmosphere, where it is less useful. And you can see there are differences in what was seen as optimal. You know, in this case, if we build SAR missions, it'll primarily be based around what technology we can build as opposed to a strict user requirement. And then in defense and security, obviously, there's a very large surveillance requirement. But typically, the main expression was, can we have more of it and more often, please? Okay. All right. So I'm now going to leave the upstream missions and go to the downstream. And again, if we look at a synthesis here, there were many requests that were common across the thematic areas. Obviously, please, can we have more data? Can we have better access to data? Can we have access to products that are, fit for purpose for us? There was a strong expression of the multi-thematic aspect in the sense that, we know that, many of the community members are not limiting their interests to, thematic bunkers, let's call them. So if you're interested in things like disaster management, obviously you're interested in what constitutes a hazard, for example, the flood, but you're also interested in the vulnerability. For example, what is the built environment? What's the human settlement? What's the vegetation aspect, etc. So this multi-thematic approach and the need for multi-thematic downstreams came out very, very strongly. And this was also expressed in terms of the decision support systems, in that, there was this very clear expression of a need for multi-scale, multi-thematic decision support systems that allowed users to get to many different kinds of risk and vulnerability across both built infrastructure and ecological infrastructure. In other words, everything from agriculture through to natural ecosystems, through to water, coastal, etc. And this was expressed in a number of different ways, but I would say it was one of the strongest aspects that came out of the expert advisory groups was this desire for multi-scale, multi-thematic decision support systems that offered a range of information very carefully synthesized for different user needs. The other one, of course, was the need for greater insight and predictive skill. So, it's where you're trying to move across from data through to products into knowledge. So the idea would be, for example, to have things like automated change detection, to be looking at, for example, let's say from a drought perspective, you would be developing the use of artificial intelligence to use the event scale data that you have access to in the last few months they are contextualized by a time series of what has happened in the past to give you predictive skill. Same thing for floods, similarly for most natural ecosystems. And then that allows you automated predictive monitoring, which was also seen as very important. And then we also had requests actually for improved governance, for the use of EO for improved governance. So more of a kind of community shaping aspect as well. All right, and how does this look? Well, we had to go and do some head scratching and look at all of this and think, well, okay, it looks something like this. So this is obviously quite a complicated diagram, but if we start at the middle, this is really out of kind of IPCC type thinking. So, risk is composed of hazard, vulnerability, exposure. And then we have the primary EO information, which is split into ecological infrastructure. So you can see here across these kind of ecosystems at different time scales, decadal, seasonal, getting to the event scale, and then getting into predictive capability to get into the decision-making here and now. Similarly, across built infrastructure, all of the different kinds of infrastructure across decadal scales, and the event scale is really more like the kind of either build or disaster management scale with analogous predictive capabilities. And the third part of this is really climate change. So to try and bring in monitoring that tells us about remote and regional climate drivers. Many of the more high impact effects of climate change we know of are expressed through extreme events, whether it's drought, heat waves, flooding, etc. And then, of course, we have defense and security, which is a little bit on its own, but requires a similar approach, even if the information is used, the information and knowledge is used in a different way. And we can see that, the kind of desktop system that you would use, that's really the heart of the decision support, focuses on the fact that you're bringing together all of this information and the synthesis of all of this information into this kind of hazard vulnerability exposure type system, multi-thematic system. So of course, how would we see this from an EO perspective? And of course, a system like this would very much not be some kind of SANSA monolith. It would very much be an interactive system that is built upon what already exists. And I'll get to that in a little while. But we are seeing the kind of existing sensors primarily contributing, across time and space. And of course, we know that many of reanalysis data sets or existing time series of satellite data would be super useful here. But we would see the new missions trying to get to, and if you cast your mind back to the 3 to 5 meters at a daily basis, really providing significant information at the event scale. So real time at time and space scales that we don't currently have access to, either because the satellites don't exist or they are commercial sensors that we don't have access to right now. So I'm just going to use an example from Neo Frontiers just to show how this kind of system could be approached in terms of the development, but also its interaction with the wider community. And it's obviously very important that it's modular and interoperable. So we're getting a little bit more into the solution space here, but I think it's important from a community perspective to look at this. So here's the system that I've just been talking about. It has a kind of provisional title of infra-eco, obviously because it combines those aspects, but that is likely to change. So the two platforms we are seeing as being the main providers of EO data from a SANSA perspective are Digital Earth Africa. So some of you may know that SANSA is taking over the program management office for that. So that would be seen as the primary technology enabler in the downstream for ecosystem dynamics. And then Digital Earth South Africa, which is starting with finding value in the spot data across a decade or so, would then expand to other sensors and be an analog to Digital Earth Africa, but focusing primarily on high resolution built infrastructure. Of course, we have the new satellites that we're looking at potentially 2 years or pretty close to it for the first ones to come about. But of course, we have a lot of existing initiatives, and it is critical that the development of this kind of system takes that into account. So this might be anything from the existing climate change R&D or monitoring initiatives, existing EO platforms, existing information systems, things like the SALGA municipal dashboard, the risk and vulnerability atlas, etc. And the R&D, which at this stage is coming primarily from Neo Frontiers, would then fit into these kind of systems. And we would be releasing R&D calls and commissioning the new capabilities using this kind of modular system to do that. And then, of course, finally, the system would also be an enabler for commercial services, because part of the aim of the SIH is to enable downstream commercial services. So there would be a combination of public service platforms, but also commercial services that allow the growth of the downstream industry. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there, and maybe we can look to see if there are any questions before we get into the Jamboards.
There was one question, Stuart, whether either of the infrastructure or either of the ecosystems will be looking at incorporating the telecom sector. Given that it was mentioned by the president last week, com satellite should be high priority. I did respond to it by saying that there's a separate process that is looking at specifically the development of the communication satellite, and it's not included in these discussions, which are largely focused on getting information from Earth observation type of satellites.
Yeah, thanks, Imran. I can only reiterate that it certainly is very much on the agenda for SIH, but we're not dealing with it explicitly here because, as Imran says, our primary focus is on Earth observation rather than communications. So I think, if there's further interest, then we're very happy to point people to other parts of SIH where, you could get a more detailed response from that question. Okay.
I think Declan wants to make a comment, Stuart.
Oh, sorry. Declan, please go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think thanks for that elaborate summary. I think just a statement from us at Disaster Management, with consideration of what you said around, having multiple uses of satellite imagery and trying to find this golden thread of users and applications and data. I think that's where the actual decision of how we go to market with products and deliverables and data, that's where the rubber hits the road. And I was just trying to think around, how best can we as a sector in disaster management leverage of other sectors. And the answer to that in my head is, around somewhere where we can go and fetch information, like a data cube, and just look at how we can layer information so that we can get a sort of indication of the landscape. So in the flooding that we're having now, we're getting a lot of calls for, what is the extent of the damage? Because not all damage is happening in formal sectors. So lots of informal housing, lots of roofs getting blown off. How do we want to see that? And if we can go to a place that's a data cube and just check what's the data availability, draw it in for that area of interest, we might not need a whole image. So around just how we navigate that space is going to be quite crucial for us, because we're never going to address all the needs of all the sectors at any given time because of the diverse user requirement. And maybe just a thought in the process of how we just manage the user requirement from a generalized data user perspective. Also keeping in touch with things like artificial intelligence, big data platforms, and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Declan. Those are very, very good thoughts. So I also need to emphasize that this is really a kind of preliminary look at the user requirements, just to find where what we would call the solution spaces exist. And when SIH is actually implemented, we would then go back to the key users, such as NDMC, and say, okay, let's go and look at a lot more detail. And typically you might find that users will require information at different levels. So there might be users like NDMC that maybe already have their own I'll call it kind of business intelligence. So they might just want an API that goes and basically a system that says, here's the latest information, we can take it out and bring it into our own systems. You might have other users that actually want the knowledge, and they basically want some system that doesn't require specialist information. They can go straight to a website, there's automated reporting that they can set up, and you can immediately see, where the high risk areas are, and it's very kind of enabling knowledge in its own right. So, yeah, thanks, Declan. But just to reiterate that, once we start implementing, we will need to go and look in even more detail, much more detail, to start building the real solution space across the thematics. Any other thoughts or questions? Otherwise, we can.
There is one in the Q&A. Is there a commitment to waste and supporting downstream applications and solutions relating to waste management? And that's Pechans in Kube.
Sorry, is that in the Q&A?
Yes.
Right. So I didn't explicitly address this. We are looking at, so for example, one of the members of the expert advisory groups was Professor Christina Troyce from UKZN. And her SACHI is looking at the kind of circular and waste economy. So we certainly have had a very clear expression that emissions monitoring, for example, from landfill and obviously other emissions emitting infrastructural sites is critical. So we have registered that. There are other aspects of the waste economy, for example, like plastic detection that we've looked at. But, we're obviously very open to hearing more about, perhaps things that we need to delve into in a little bit more detail. So I hope that answered that to first degree. I see we have a hand up from Robbie. Herman, do you think you could just open Rob's microphone briefly, and then maybe he can just ask the question as opposed to posting it? Okay, Robbie, you're good to go.
I think they open for the wrong person. I hope London.
Oh, sorry, Herman, you opened the mic for the wrong Robert.
Okay, let me just check. Sorry. I'm just checking on the list. Is it under the attendees?
Yeah, attendees Rob Luntman.
So why is it not showing? Ah, sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Am I there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can. Thanks, Robbie. Please go for it.
Sorry, man. I joined a little bit late, so I didn't get your whole presentation. But on the space agency's availability of data, at the moment, commercial companies, for our company in particular, INJ, we buy a lot of AIS data from Exact Earth, and we pay, it's obviously in euro terms, so we buy all the data for the ships along our coastline into an Esri package, an ArcGIS package. Is there going to be an option that we can purchase the data directly from South African companies that are putting satellites into the, I know that you've, I think South Africa launched 3 new nano satellites for AIS specifically a couple of weeks ago from the US. I think they were put into orbit. Is there going to be an opportunity for companies to commercially purchase that data? I know that, you know, or will it be freely available to companies to get a hold of, in order for us to digest it into our applications like ArcGIS that we're monitoring our ships with?
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. That's a very good question. I think, so yeah, those MDA sats were, I mean, SANSA were not heavily involved in that. It was the Cape Peninsula University of Technology and DSI. I think it's a developing space because it was, the satellites were launched as operational, but I think the, let's just say the business plan was not very, not elucidated in great detail. So I think, you know, what we can do is relay back to, and there are obviously also discussions about using SANSA's ground segment to receive the data. So I think the fact that there's a very clear expression of interest in I&J from companies like I&J means that, you know, we should push on this and basically try to make those data available in whatever hopefully low-cost structure is most appropriate. So let's maybe talk to you more about that in the week or so to come, Robbie, if that's all right.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, I think, you know, even with the SAMHSA, with fisheries compliance, with DEF, the department, they all, you know, at the moment they're using a VMS system to monitor fishing vessels on our fishing in the correct areas. We know we've got a whole lot of MPAs that have been declared along our coastline. We use a VMS system. There's a compliance thing that the government is using. This is obviously I&J has their own private system where we monitor all our assets in near real time. I think it's every 5 minutes we're picking up the AIS feed data and digesting it into a geo-event server to make sure that we can have observations on our, but that data at the moment is, we're purchasing that data, and I think it's a real opportunity for South African companies in our space, you know, the space agency that has, as you say, that ground network to digest that data to make available commercial data for commercial use. I mean, it's not. Yeah,
absolutely, it's an opportunity.
And I think there's and even if there is some sort of package within government structures that want to use it for compliance reasons, I mean, they are trying to put, you know, trying to get us to use because the VMS system is very, I think it only pings a vessel every half an hour, and it's quite an old VMS system, vessel monitoring system that has been in place. I think the AIS technology is a lot more robust and more real time. So I think there's real opportunity there for us, for, you know, to play a role in the compliance of the fisheries.
Yeah, absolutely. So the original plan was for OSIMs to, you know, the integrated vessel tracking to be, as you say, ingesting that data from MDASat. And it actually did ingest data from the Forerunner mission, ZA-Cube-2. But, you know, I think a very clear expression of need by South African companies for a, you know, mature South African AIS product, you know, that's exactly where the SIH should be going, is to kind of, you know, close that loop, right?
So Stuart, and not to hog the thing, while I've just got you, the other, and I'm sure you touched based on it, was the harmful algal bloom and the monitoring of our coastline, with us having aquaculture operations all along the coast. red tide algal blooms are on the forefront of looking after that biological asset. And obviously that is your Earth observation data satellites that are taking those photographs of the near chlorophyll along the coastline. That is extremely valuable for us as a forewarning. We're coming into, while I've got you on face here, is the February, March, as you know, is coming along. We've had some really warm weather coming. We're all kind of like standing on our toes at the moment. Are we going to have a red tide bloom? Should we start preparing things? We have seen phenomenal warming and extreme cold, extreme warm water coming onto the shelf in the last month, which I think is a result of the La Nina that is coming in, and we've got these storms passing through. But that kind of data, which you guys have been so good at helping us with the OSIMs, has been really, has been really beneficial. Hopefully that will continue and that will be improved. And that's, ocean condition with regard to climate change effect is very, very important.
Yeah. So, OSIMs is really one of the systems that's seen as a kind of exemplar, and part of the SIH thinking will be to try and support and build upon that as much as possible. So maybe, Robbie, that's a good time to segue over to Marjolaine, who has her hand up.
There's 2 questions in the Q&A as well.
Okay, sure. So maybe, Herman, if you could just open Marjolaine's mic briefly, and let's just get a brief response from Marjolaine, and then I'll go over to the questions in the Q&A. Marjolaine, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Stuart. I just really wanted to follow up on your comment earlier that the AIS data launched by CPAT, the plan is to integrate all of this within OSIMs. We are processing a lot of AIS data at the moment within OSIMs, and these data are for the moment confidential because they used their security vetting to use the applications. A lot of the information is used for surveillance and defense. But I note your comments, and this is something that I can personally follow up on, maybe pushing for certain aspects of these integrating vessel tracking system to be made available either at a price or publicly. And it's actually a discussion we've had before, right at the end of last year, about maybe some aspects of the IVT should be made available publicly. And so we will follow up on that. In terms of the comment you made with harmful algal blooms, it's really nice to hear. One of the difficulty we have in OSIMs is to really demonstrate the economic value of what we do. And so if we could have input from industry to actually maybe try and even put some sort of value as to what the system is bringing them, one of the main objectives of OSIMs is to empower economic development in the marine space. And if we can show that we are doing that and we are helping industry actually increase their benefits, that's also very good for us. So any feedback would be really appreciated on our part. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Marjolaine. That's excellent. So, we're already kind of connecting the dots there quite nicely. And thank you very much for picking up and taking Robbie's very good example of industry, direct industry interest in, satellites that were launched last week. That's just terrific. Okay, so I think that's a good segue into the next question on the post. Tilivali saying, picking up similarities between this project and the remote sensing R&D by CSIR. Are the projects related? Well, in a larger sense, of course they are. I mean, they're not directly related financially, but a lot of the OSIM's development in the last 5 years or so has informed the way we approach things like SIH, because, OSIMs and APHIS are potentially the best examples we have of EO-based public service development, systems of, complex information systems. And when SIH is implemented, we would obviously see, a lot of the EO expertise in the country resides at CSIR. So we would see the CSR being heavily involved in the development, which maybe takes us over to Opa's question too, because again, if we look at SIH development, there's much of it will be external. So when we look at, say, that infra ecosystem and the different components of it, so let's say, for example, you're starting with raw data that's coming in through to the midstream, and then things like level 1, level 2 processing, going into a data cube, and then going into some kind of knowledge system. Industry and the R&D community, we would certainly see them being involved at all stages of anything from algorithm development through to development of the data cubes or the APIs into the data cubes, through to the development of the knowledge systems. And then, of course, there's the ability to build commercial services on the end of that. So, for example, if we use the I&J example, you might find that there is actually space for an SMME to enter the market, taking that MDA-SAT AIS data and adding value to it, and taking it out to commercial users. Just a off my head example.
Stuart, I was wondering if Tidivali's comment was also related to the work that is being done by the CSR around the benefits, economic benefits study as well.
Ah, yes. Thanks, Imran. So CSR have been working on effectively an economic analysis of space and the technology roadmaps there. So SANSA and SIH have been interacting very closely with the CSIR team to try and make sure that we're aligned. We're using similar frameworks to look at the economics and the technology development, etc. Imran, I don't know if you maybe want to comment more on that.
No, I think that you've covered all of it. Maybe just to say that right from the outset of both of these studies, the user requirements and the economic benefits one, there's been a very strong cross-pollination between the two to ensure that there's deep synergy between the two as well. So, yep, I think you've hit this.
Yeah. So again, I need to reiterate that SANSA is quite a small organization, and we do not have the desire or the capability to go and create complex systems like this on our own. And part of our mandate is actually supporting the development both of the community and the industry. So, and this user requirements is part of that, because it's not just about getting your ideas about where the priorities lie. It's actually also about, trying to get greater community buy-in to the SIH, and effectively starting to create the communities of practice that are needed to really kind of make it happen, both in terms of the implementation, and the financial impacts of that, aspects of that, but also, of course, the kind of uptake and the success of it, in the years to come. All right, so I don't think we have any more questions from hands or chat or Q&A. So I think if that's the case, we can actually move over and look at the Jamboards. Herman, I don't know if you have released the survey yet.
Stuart, the survey will be sent after the webinar is finished.
Oh, I see. The
That's how it
questions
works.
won't be made available now.
No, that's only after the webinar is finished.
Ah, I
It will be
see.
sent
Okay,
out to-
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. And that will be sent out on an automated basis from the Zoom system,
Well,
right?
when the webinar finishes, each attendee will be redirected to a web page with a survey, and by tomorrow they will also receive a reminder email with the link for the survey.
All right. So I'll just ask everyone, please, to try and answer those questions. You know, I mean, it's 8 questions. I think it'll take you, 3 or 4 minutes. Okay. So Shangani, I think we can actually move over to the Jamboards. Maybe if we can post the link or make sure the link is, I think it is, oh no, that's just to the panelists. So,
all right, I'm just gonna post the link right now to the chat.
All right, great. So everyone, you should see a link appearing in the chat, and if you click on that, you'll be taken to a Google Jamboards, and I will hand over to Shangani to give you Jamboards 101, and then we will. Okay, great. All right, so the link has appeared. So
all right, okay, I can see people joining in on the Jamboard. So for the interactive session for this workshop, we'll be using a Jamboard. And I think some of us or some of the participants here are already familiar with the Jamboard from our previous engagements. But just a quick recap for those who were not part of those engagements. So a Jamboard is just basically an interactive virtual whiteboard, which we will be using to input our responses. So on the left-hand side here on this panel, we have different icons and items which the Google Jamboard has provided to input the responses. But then for this session, we'll be using this sticky note, which is the 4th icon from the top. So you just click on it right there. And then because the Jamboard only has 5 colors available here, just before you put in your response, you can just write your name and then your response, just like that. And then once done, you can press save, and then most of the time the sticky notes will appear on the top left-hand corner. So you can just drag it down to the body of the Jamboard and then just increase the size and decrease. And just to make it a bit easier, can we just limit our responses to maybe short sentences, or not anything too long, not anything like a paragraph, just short sentences. And also you can go back and edit your sticky note. So for this workshop, we'll be having 4 slides for the Jamboard, per thematic area. So to toggle between the slides, you can just go to the top here in the middle and then use the next arrow to go to the next frame. So yeah, I think that is about it. It's pretty simple. Yeah, nothing to it.
all right, great. Thanks, Shangani. I know it says ecosystems and biodiversity, but please don't feel constrained by that. It should really be any aspect of Earth observation or even space, if you want to. So Kabir is saying, please, can you send the link again? Okay, so I'll just share my screen, Shangani. That's good. All right. So please, everyone, go and, you know, think of some crazy headlines for us. It's slightly lighthearted, but it also actually gives us some useful information in terms of, you know, whether people feel that the impact comes from the technology. So, for example, you know, the launch of the 3 MDA sats on SpaceX, that was obviously a really, you know, a good headline, partially because of SpaceX, but let's hope more because of the South African satellites. You know, I've chosen to add an example there that talks about the economic impact of the space development. You know, really can be whatever you feel is important. If you think it should be on, you know, drones or in situ sensors, that's also, you know, perfectly fine. So, don't be shy. I see we've got 40 odd people on there, so that's good. Yeah, great. Carbon trading. I think we had some previous headlines about, you know, net sum zero, which is obviously a huge aspect. So, you know, even if you just want just to do a little test to make sure you can capture your ideas, but, you know, I would encourage you to get stuck in if you can, because most of the information that I showed you in terms of the synthesis from the EAG, okay, it wasn't so much the headlines, but it came through the use of the Jamboards, and we've really found it very, very useful. Okay, great. Food security, mineral exploration, mine rehabilitation, pollution, networks of buoys and satellites. I like that. If you want to express yourself with scribbles, that's also fine, but please try not to obscure too many of the sticky notes. Drone farming. Uptake in education, that's a good one. Yeah, prevent a 2-degree world. I think we might be too late, but I like the ambition. Smart energy, rhino poaching. Yeah, you could imagine that being quite multi-technology. Formation drones, I like that. Yeah. So very specific pixels of interest. That's hopefully where the AI would take it. You only get the information that is you have designated as importance to yourself. I'm trying to have to make some of these a little bit smaller to fit more in.
Stuart, so I've duplicated this frame. So if there's not enough space, you can just slide over to the next one. Yeah.
All right. I think we probably, looks like we might be able to squeeze everyone in. Thanks, Shangani. Yeah, I mean, you know, the human footprint that's a very interesting one, because the one thing I didn't explicitly talk about was, for example, things like natural capital accounting. And if we think of that infra-eco downstream, you know, one of the key aspects in terms of governance that we would want to use it for is to inform things like natural capital accounting. So, you know, an example of that might be using new high-res, relatively high-res spectral missions to look at things like, you know, mangroves and things that provide coastal defenses, kelp beds, et cetera, et cetera. And then that information then looks at showing just what the huge value of things like coastal ecosystem services are. Yeah, floods and urban heat islands. So, you know, one of the other things that we would hope would come out of systems like this would be the concept of things like urban metabolism, where, you know, you're looking at the built infrastructure, but you're also actually looking at the flux of various components actually through those cities and how they interact with the ecological infrastructure. And of course, you need quite a sophisticated system to be able to do that. All right, great. Well, we are meant to be taking a break from 10:45 to 11. So what I suggest is that, let me stop this share, that we just leave this here and we go and get some coffee and have a break. And I suggest, rather than, because we're running 15 minutes ahead of time, it's not often in a workshop you'll hear that. Why don't we come back at 10 to 11? So we've got a nice 20-minute break, and then we will have a quick look at how full up our headlines are and move on to the other Jamboard sessions. All right, hopefully everyone's happy with that. So yeah, please go, you know, stretch your legs, have a comfort break, get a cup of tea or whatever, and we'll see you back here in 22 minutes time, 10 to 11, and you can continue going with the Jamboards. All right, see you shortly. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope we have most people back with us. So let me just explain what we're going to do now. Okay, so what we will do now is we've got 8 little mini sessions of 10 minutes each. My apologies to the expert advisory group members, because basically we'll be revisiting the information you gave us, but of course now you have the opportunity to comment in other thematic areas. So we'll spend 10 minutes in each. Shangani will post the link to each of those sessions as they start. And we will do the first 4, which is biodiversity and ecosystems, water resource management, agriculture and forestry, and marine and maritime. And then we'll go and have another little break. And we will then move on to the built environment, disaster management, atmosphere and climate, and mining, energy, and geoscience. And then we will wrap up after that. And in those sessions, we'll basically have 3 Jamboards, 2 of which will run at the same time, which is the downstream and predictive. So if you remember from the previous discussion, the downstream refers to information systems based around existing satellites, and the predictive refers to specific new knowledge technology that allows us to look at risk in a much more quantified way and to improve the quality of our crystal ball when it comes to multi-thematic decision making. So I think we can move to the Jamboards. And we'll see the link has been posted in the Jamboard. So let me stop this share. So please go on to the link. Just label this here. So as I said, we're going to start off with these 2, and we're going to spend 5 minutes, and I would ask you to flip between these 2 and put your post-it notes in as to what you see as the highest priority for new downstream capabilities, i.e. information systems, as they relate to biodiversity and ecosystems, and also new intelligence and predictive capabilities. Oh, and I realize that as I look at this, I'm not sharing my screen, so that would be useful. Okay. So post-it notes for information systems on the downstream, and post-it notes for intelligence and predictive for biodiversity and ecosystems. And please bear in mind that many of these very nice headlines here would naturally go into that downstream and intelligence aspect. So, you know, feel free to look at what you've put or what other people have put as major headlines in here, and we've got some very nice ones, and translate that into the downstream and the intelligence systems. So for example, we might say downstream, I'm just going to go with multi-thematic high res risk and bit of a mouthful, but anyway. All right, that's good. And then we can also do the other one at the same time. So I'm going to put, for example, so thinking with this one is that, you know, once we have our AI working, most of the change detection that is currently done on a semi-manual basis can then be done on an automated basis. All right, easier access to data. So please, let's give this one, we'll give it till just after 11. So, you know, please, let's have your ideas. They're very important. We need them. So get stuck in to both the downstream and the predictive. And I'll just keep flipping between them to see how we're getting along. Okay, agricultural planning and decision making, that's great. You know, one of the things that we've realized and in discussions with CSR and the ARC and TIA is that, of course, there are many different agricultural sectors and they all need to be approached slightly differently. So some of you may have seen that in the last Neo Frontiers call, there was actually a call about building the specific user requirements for small-scale agriculture and smart farming. So we're trying to push, I hope, in the right directions. Yeah, so again, just to remind you that it's a new link that's posted in the Jamboard. If there are ones that are coming in here, okay, good. Okay, no one's putting it in there, that's good. So, all right, good. We're starting to see some things coming through. Easier access, cloud processing, wetlands time series. Full value chain and collaborative agency with other African countries. Yeah, so again, you know, obviously these are national user requirements, but they also speak to the region. And certainly, you know, both public and any commercial EO capabilities that are offsprings of this would very much speak to the regional aspect. So it's very important that we actually get a regional representation as much as we can in here, which is also why we made this workshop as open as possible regionally. Okay, batch scripting for time series and regional subsetting. That's good. So I think that would actually speak to the development of the downstream capability. And obviously that automated processing would be a key part of the SIH infrastructure, whether it's within SANSA or developed for SANSA or lies outside SANSA, that is not critical at the moment. The critical thing is that it is enabled. All right, a few more minutes. So I would encourage you to go into predictive. Okay, machine learning for informal settlements, very good. AI forecasting and multi-criteria analysis, different agricultural sectors, good. Drought monitoring. Okay, good, we got a bit of artwork as well. Conversation areas for monitoring land invasions. Okay, that's taking it more into the additional social networks, so that's quite interesting to see. Okay, good. Okay, APIs for tasking and downloading. Okay, to imagery at a lot of different levels. That's good. All right. Okay, I think let's move on. Again, these Jamboards will remain available. Don't forget, we do have a different link for each thematic area, and the summary of the Jamboards will also be made available to all the attendees. Okay, so I think let's move on, because we have to be fairly quick because of the fact we're trying to get through all of these thematic areas. So this one is a little bit more technical, in the sense that we say, what kind of optical sensor is going to give us the most value for biodiversity and ecosystems and biodiversity. So please move over to this 3 of 4 link here. And have a think about, in time and space, what kind of mission would give you the most impact. So, and I would encourage you to think beyond existing missions. So for example, if we get lots of requests, for example, for Sentinel-2, well, there is already Sentinel-2. So we need to kind of change the parameters somehow. And typically, what we're looking at is to increase, resolution in either time and space to enable more powerful observations. So please, anyone who has any strong ideas about typical new sensors for biodiversity and ecosystems, please put them in here. So if, for example, you wanted a WorldView 3 type capability, maybe with improved resolution, i.e. high precision multispectral data at a sub 1 meter resolution, then you'd be targeting a block probably somewhere here. So going with the other ones. Oh, that's good. Wow. Okay, so let's just give this one a few more minutes. Again, I would encourage you to move over to this 3 or 4. I see we're labeled up there, biodiversity and ecosystem, so that's good. Okay, 10 meters bi-weekly. So I'm going to Yeah, so 0.1 actually means 0.1 of a day. Yeah, that's good. All right. Okay, good arrow there. 3 meters bi-weekly, so that would be somewhere over there. Some areas will get crowded, so I would encourage you to just, you know, follow this and just put it close to it. So we know what resolution and what kind of revisit we're seeing it. Yeah, that's a good point. But, you know, what we're hoping to do is provide a first constellation that obviously the first series of satellites will be at a fixed resolution. And then in the next evolution, which was typically be, well, depending upon the resources available, you might then look at evolving, you know, the sensor capability to change that. So this would be a starting point. And pretty much this is the way that most programs operate. So for example, Sentinel looks at next generation Sentinel satellites, you know, only in 2030. So that's probably what, 14, 15 years after the first, I think 8 per constellation. Okay, planet data with NIR, better radiometric quality. So that's actually something like this, right? All right, I think we're going to have to close this one down and move to water resource management, which is next. So, Shangani, could we post the link for okay, land invasion? That would be probably a combination of this and built environment. So hold that thought also for built environment. Okay, so we can see our water resource link is up. I'm going to click on it. So we're officially moving over to water resource management. If you wish to keep going with biodiversity and add to it, that's also good. Okay, so similarly for water resource management. So here we're looking at water quantity, water quality, water levels, drought, provision of water, you know, think as broadly as possible. Okay, farm dams for drought relief. So I guess that would speak to water quantity at much smaller scales. So I'm not sure what the minimum size of water body we currently handle with the water quantity layers is. Okay, water use licensing. Okay, C-band, yeah. And also please don't forget that we're looking at the predictive side of things too for water. So, you know, we might look at something like that, for example. Okay, floods. TWS has no record of municipal dams. Okay, that's an important one. All right, so there's quite a lot of, we need more information on the smaller dams. Yeah, groundwater. So the SAR and the thermal would also speak more to the soil moisture aspect. And of course those, okay, Mark. Water quantities limit around 25,000 cumex. Clumped for volumes. Okay. 0.5 of a hectare is the smallest. Okay, thanks very much, Mark. So I'm not sure in South Africa if it works on the inverse law that the smaller resolution, you know, you switch from 100 meters to 10 meters, for example, and you know, that's a exponential increase in the number of water bodies, at least. Okay, stream flow predictability and flooding. So of course, you know, much of the water resource management depends not only on the EO itself, but also some fairly sophisticated hydro modeling in order to really understand the impact of the EO products. Okay, don't forget to add some predictive if you can. We'll just leave this open for another minute or so, and then we'll switch over. Okay, so Mark says 80 to 90%, typically less than 5 hectares. Right. So with our 0.5 of a hectare, I guess we're capturing, well, I don't know how much of that 80 or 90%. A fair proportion, I guess. All right, that's good. Filling up nicely. Okay, levels of pollution. So that would probably be indirect. We'd have to look at the kind of eutrophication. Okay, so we're actually, from a bulk perspective, from Mark's conversation, getting most of the water bodies, but you are clumping the smaller ones. So if we want kind of more refined geospatial information on each dam, I guess maybe that might be where one of the value points is. Okay, AMD, yeah, that's acid mine drainage. So again, that might be more of an indirect aspect where you are looking at the diversity or the eutrophication. I remember a few years ago looking at Loskop Dam and acid mine drainage, and you had to take a kind of slightly indirect approach to it. All right, so can we move over to the spatial and temporal resolution scale? So, and given these discussions here about, you know, getting into the municipal and the smaller dams, etc., and the conversation, the chat that Mark is posting. Okay, sinkholes, yeah. All right, so let's maybe try and put a little bit of information, if we can, into the temporal and spatial resolution. You know, what kind of resolution and revisit time is actually going to make the difference. I actually suspect it's likely to be similar to the previous one in terms of this. You know, and we joke that it's almost like a double down on Sentinel-2 because you're looking for you know, twice the resolution, i.e. 5 meters, and twice the revisit, i.e. 2 to 3 days. So please feel free to, we don't have a graph for SAR. So if you wish to make specific SAR comments, just please use this. We felt with 10 minutes per thematic, it was a bit much to be getting into the SAR. So if you want to make a SAR point, just say SAR and make it in here, and then at least we've captured it.
Stuart, I don't know if you saw the question from Mark.
Yes. Herman, do you want to maybe just open up the mic for Mark or promote him to a panelist, and then he can just quickly give us his thoughts rather than having to type at lightning speed?
Mark Thompson, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, I've moved him to a panelist.
Okay. Mark?
Sorry, morning, Stuart. Morning, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't find the mic switch.
Sure. So, yeah, so Mark, maybe just comment on this idea of the larger and smaller water bodies and kind of what you're actually getting from going into the smaller water bodies.
Okay. In the system, which is based on Sentinel 20-meter data, what we're measuring and sort of identifying each month is probably about 95 to 97% of all water bodies, both natural and man-made, across the entire country. The bulk of the water bodies by number are definitely the smaller water bodies, probably less than 5 hectares. Okay. But the bulk of the volume of strategic national water resources are all within the actual much larger dams. I think DWAF or Water Affairs has a category, so strategic dams, safety dams, and so on. So you're probably looking at a couple of hundred, less than 1,000 larger dams, which carry the bulk of the water across the entire country. In terms of the way that the volumes are modeled, we model the individual dams, the volumes each individual dam is reported as a separate entity if you're looking at a threshold of about 25,000 cumecs in terms of volume, which is probably round about likes of 1 to 2 hectares in size. So there's about 3,000, probably a bit larger than that actually, there's about 3,000 individual dams across the country that we provide or the system provides individual volumes for. All the dams which are smaller than that, which is probably in the region of about 200,000 dams.
That growing move in that direction. Abel, over to you, please.
Thank you, Stuart. No, I was just fascinated by what Mark was saying. I just wanted to find out if Mark is still on the panel. You know, because there's there's the extend mapping, and you were also talking about the volume. But on the volume side, I just wanted to find out, are you only using the optical, or there's a bit of integration? Are you using only one data, like Sentinel-2, or there's integration of multiple data sources? Because that could also be useful to note in this type of meeting. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Abel. Do you want me to go ahead, Stuart?
Yeah, please go for it, Mark.
Okay, Abel, for the actual surface area determination, we use a combination of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2. So we've actually got the system to be effectively cloud cover independent. The volumes are not derived from the imagery directly. What happens is that we've actually spent quite a lot of time building terrain-based models that we use to categorize, I think it's about 17 different landscape or landform sort of characteristics across the country, which we can actually also move outside the country to other areas. And we have generic algorithms for those landform characteristics, which we then use to determine the volume for a given surface area under those topographic sort of curvature conditions. And we actually we built those around what are known as the HVA tables from Water Affairs, so you can actually calibrate what we're getting against what the original sort of planning and construction design was. So for the larger dams, you're probably getting above 95% accuracy. For the very smaller dams, it can go down to lows of 50 and 60, but then you're talking sort of dams smaller than 1 hectare. but for the big dams, it's very, very accurate. It is as a methodology.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so sadly, we'll have to move on from that. And we're now going into agriculture. So you can see the Agri link has been posted in the chat. I think we've actually already had some of the agriculture and forestry ideas captured in the biodiversity. So similarly, as per the last one, we're just going to spend 5 minutes on filling in the downstream and the predictive, and then we will move on to the time and space resolution. So please click on that new link posted by Induduzo, and let's have a look at the agriculture and forestry. Now, agriculture is also interesting because obviously this is one of the biggest commercial uses of EO. And if Rob is still there and wishes to consider aquaculture under agriculture and forestry, then I would very much encourage him to do that too. So, you know, one of the things we need to think about is, where do you draw the line between public service systems for agriculture, and where do you try and create space for downstream players to actually add value in a commercial service? So our emerging thinking, and it's very useful to get the community ideas, is that the public service development should focus more on you know, small scale farming, the extension services, that side of things. And the more agribusiness, large scale farming, there are already commercial players obviously out there, is to focus a little bit more on enabling more effective commercial services. So, you know, any comments on those kind of approaches also very much appreciated. Okay, water for informal settlement, agriculture development, yeah. Deforestation, yeah. Small scale farmers, well, hopefully we're taking a step in that direction with the Neo Frontiers call. Front area. And don't forget to get into the predictive, because in agriculture and well, in all areas, but you know, we would see very high economic value in the predictive capability. So of course, you know, this is why we wanted all of the thematics. You know, we were just talking about water availability for agriculture, you know, and Mark talking about the complexity of that. So, you know, it is very multi-thematic, but please don't forget to add any thoughts to the predictive. Okay, closed mine settlements, self-sustaining agricultural development. Okay, so I'm guessing this is kind of rehabilitation moving to agriculture. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that correctly. Yeah. So, you know, the drone aspect is a very interesting one. And certainly, as far as drones are concerned, I would see that effectively as part of EO. And obviously, that could be a very kind of distributed industry. So I would encourage the SIH thinking to be, you know, there are specific applications where drones are maybe far more cost effective and can provide greater information, are easily bundled in a reasonably low cost commercial service. And there's actually an industry growth area, you know, in that domain. So I would rather think of drones in that, you know, we can enable this too, and it's not an exclusive either or. It's what is the right technology for the application and the scale. Okay, the seasonal forecast. So again, you know, it's talking to the multi-thematic aspects. Yeah, so Natasha's comment, I mean, this is often the problem with some of the larger projects around agriculture is you're not reaching the smaller scale end users because of the nature of development, and also because you haven't got methods to really engage with them and provide them with the products in a way that allows them to make decisions. So, you know, we've seen a very interesting on the marine side with abelobi, which supports small scale fishes, is, you know, you really actually need very, very strong community engagement and trust to build useful systems in those kind of areas. Okay, flood and drought, that's good. Okay, so some of these are potentially predictive, but let's not worry too much about that. All right, I'm afraid I'm going to have to move us on again. So if we can go to the time and space scales and have a look at that. And again, if there is SAR or thermal that you feel would be very high innovation, then, you know, please, you know, drop that in here. You can see we're having to rush already, so we didn't really have the time to look at this. So perhaps it's best if you just ignore the optical and just say, if it's another technology, what you think it is. So, you know, we've already discussed the high value thermal, yeah, for things like soil moisture, and I'm sure for all kinds of plant physiology, etc., as well. So our thinking also about that kind of Sentinel-2 double down is that that's perceived as being very high value for agriculture. So this kind of space here. All right, let's just give this a few more minutes and then we'll have to move on to marine and maritime. So, okay, a tick, that's good. Okay. That's good. So I think there is only one new space mission that is looking at going. There's a UK very much an emerging mission called Satellite View, VU, that is looking at 3.5 meter sub-daily thermal emissions, actually targeting mostly urban and building specific heat emissions. So 10 meter, okay, that's a good one to see. Thanks very much, Lauren. Good to have you here. All right. Okay. I think let us move on then to the last one before we have a break, which is the marine and maritime. So Kui, maybe if you can post the link. Okay. So we have the link there for marine and maritime. So let's please go to it. Okay, so now we have to change our thinking a little bit because, you know, the requirements for marine and maritime can be a little bit different. Bear in mind that this marine and maritime it does include coastal monitoring. So if, for example, we're looking at coastal wetlands, mangroves, kelp beds, you know, whether it's on the wet or the dry coast, you know, just please capture that. It'll obviously also include much more oceanographic type phenomena. So Rob was talking about harmful algal blooms, and obviously that's extremely important. Also fisheries, for example. I think we had a headline around a fisheries predictive capability. So, you know, that would fit well into this kind of aspect. And we know that that fisheries predictive capability it's doable through things like fronts, time series providing you with kind of ecosystem state information, but to translate it into really effective information for the fisheries industry requires quite complex models. Yeah, so please get stuck in. Also, you know, we had a buoys and satellites. You know, I don't wish to put too much of my own stuff in there. So if you want multi-scale observations, then, you know, this is the place to capture it. You know, and traditionally, marine-focused EO, talking about observing the wet coast and the oceans, is far more focused on information that's very rich in time with a very rapid repeat to get the event scale, and much less focus on the spatial resolution. Apart from if you're very close to the coast. Okay, coastal erosion mapping. Any thoughts about actual ocean itself? I'll just make a note here to okay, piracy, yeah. So, you know, the OSIM's IVT already provides us with a fairly mature capability there, but there's certainly the need to better support that from a resource perspective and also from a SAR perspective. Yeah, route management as well. This is a real growth area, and there's actually quite a big industry in it. I don't think with any South African players yet. Okay, that's good. Predictive fishing tools, yeah. So, Herman, I don't know if Robbie still got his mic open. I can't, when I'm sharing, I can't see too much.
Must I give him access again?
Yes, please. Maybe just make him a panelist. I think that seems to be the easiest. So, Robbie, on that question, you know, obviously fishing companies are competitive commercial entities with, as we know, a very strong investment in business intelligence. You know, how would you see, the way I would see it is potentially SANSA setting up the data cubes and the basic data infrastructure that then allows commercial operators, which may or may not include the science councils, to actually provide the high value predictive tools. You know, how your thoughts on how that might be structured would be very interesting. Robbie, are you there? There we go. You can chat if you wish.
Okay. Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go for it.
Yeah, it's a highly emotive and obviously competitiveness amongst fishermen are you know, forefront, and people aren't really happy to provide predictive fishing tools, because obviously the environment and the fish, giving the fish a chance to it's man against nature, catching the fish, but it does go towards efficiency. So the more efficient you are, the more efficient you can fish, especially in commercial fisheries, the less impact you have on the environment. So, you know, I've always said to people that are doing tools that it helps companies. We have a certain time period in order to catch our quota. If we're able to catch it quicker, then we have less of an impact on the environment, because everything that we do in the ocean does have some sort of impact. So, and you're right, it is difficult. You know, it's a public resource. How do you make that available? I think what you were referring to makes a lot of sense. Is when you make the data models available, because predicting where fish are going to be and what you're going to catch is basically based on the environmental factors. So, you know, fish are influenced in their movement and migration by environmental things that are happening along the coastline. So those, if we are able to predict the changes in the environmental parameters, and companies are able to buy that information and get it and assimilate it, and then develop in-house tools to help them predict where the fish are going to be, that would be useful. And I suppose it does go to competitive advantage of companies. You know, if you have more resources, you're going to do that. We do develop our own tool, and there are commercial tools available. You know, people can buy Insight Explorer, for example, is a predictive fishing tool that is used and is commercially available, and it uses data that the fishermen input into their little application. It links it to weather data, and then it gives them an algorithm that tells them where those conditions are going to occur in the next 5 days. So it doesn't tell them they're going to catch fish or predict where they're going to catch fish. It simply says, you've caught fish here today under these conditions, and the fisherman puts these conditions into the application, and then the application then predicts where those weather conditions are likely to occur in the future, in the next 5 or week or 2 weeks ahead. And it helps him then move and make a decision whether he's going to travel 100 nautical miles to the next fishing spot where those conditions are likely to occur, and whether he catches the fish under those conditions there are up to him. But those kind of predictive weather and ocean predictions of where conditions are going to occur in the future based on what is being measured presently are useful. So typically the satellites that we currently are having, taking ocean surface temperature, taking current speeds, taking altimetry of the ocean's salinity, etc. Those are all things that we use in our fishing predicting to where the fish are going to be, what we would like to see is how to intelligently work out where that is going to move to in the next 5 days. So I think that the way that you described it, Stuart, is the way that people will probably, it will probably happen, is that you guys provide the environmental models that can be assimilated by tools that are commercially available.
Yeah. Okay. No, good. Thanks, Robbie. I think the other idea, of course, with potential fishing zones, etc., is that if you have extremely good compliance mechanisms, like, for example, a beefed up IVT, it allows you to deploy your predictive fishing tools with greater confidence, because you're not going to get people using it to abuse the quotas or whatever. Yeah.
For sure. I think compliance, as I said before, AIS compliance, monitoring ship movements, monitoring the foreign vessels coming into our waters. We often ask that, how do we make sure that no one else is catching the fish within our economic zone? Of course, that's a security issue. So I think there's a lot of use for this sort of partnerships in public and with government too.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, people. We need to finish this and have another break. For the people suggesting ocean color SAR and SST, that's great. If you want to add a spatial resolution and a revisit time to those, that would be very useful, because that what we're looking for is how do we improve either in space and time or spectral information upon the existing sensors, and do we have the technology and resources to see that as high value. Okay, so I think we're meant to start again at 12. So, okay, excellent. Thank you. C-band, SAR, 10 meters, 12 hours. Great. So that would be, not there. 10 meters, cool. Okay, so what I suggest we do is, for marine and maritime who wish to keep populating this, that would be terrific. I suggest we take our break now and take 15 minutes, and then we'll come back at 12 and we will try and complete our other 4 thematic sessions. So thank you very much. You can go and ingest even more caffeine if you want now, and we will see you back here at 12 o'clock for the last session in the workshop. Thanks. Okay, everyone. Hope you had a good little break. So thanks for sticking with us. Thanks to all the people who've already had to leave. We're doing well. So I think we're now going to move on to the last 4 thematics. And we're going to start with the built environment. So maybe if the CUI team can post the link to the built environment. Thanks, Yolanda. And I'm just going to have to, unfortunately, keep the pace up here so that we can finish in time. Okay, so the built environment. So this is a very important consumer of EO. It's a role that Sansa has played very strongly in the past. At this stage, a lot of it is dealing with commercial sensors. You know, the Spot, the Pleiades, the Worldviews, new entrants such as Black Sky or Planet Labs. So as per the other sessions, so let's start with our downstream and intelligence and post what we see the highest priorities are in there. And I would particularly ask the built environment specialists to try and distinguish between the kind of sub 1 meter and the above 1 meter, not least because the sub 1 meter we will probably need to rely on an increased access to commercial sensors. But the above 1 meter, we think we may be able to tackle from a domestic mission perspective. So yeah, please, let rip. So I'll put in an example to get us started. Okay, subsidence. We are particularly interested in your perspectives from the intelligence perspective of whether we should be looking to build effectively object cubes. So if you think of how most data cubes are structured, you know, there's some, if you look at optical sensors, there's some kind of reflectance, and then there's geophysical products. Now, one of the things we'd like to explore from intelligence perspective is to have cubes that, for example, are roads or rail or, you know, dwellings of a certain size. So I'll try and kind of capture that in here. You know, and one of the other things we're focusing on is a kind of persistent change detection. So looking at capabilities where you can from an automated perspective, either detect a change in the built environment and potentially its impact upon the natural environment, for example, vegetation or biodiversity or something like that, or even water, or the other way around, where you can detect a change in the ecological infrastructure and look across to the built environment and see whether there is, for example, some kind of causal effect. And then, of course, from a predictive capability, you're looking at, for example, things like urban change from either from an investment or an infrastructure perspective, but also urban change from a disaster management perspective, and whether you can look at some aspect of that. So, for example, in that hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, there is the opportunity to also get a lot of information on, from the built environment perspective, the vulnerability and the exposure aspects. Okay, infrastructure and footprints, potholes, subsidence, urban sprawl, footpath detection. Whoa, that's that requires some resolution there. Okay, predicting sinkholes, need very high res, yeah. So again, you know, some of these requirements will probably only really be realizable with kind of next generation satellites, but it's very good to have them captured. So, you know, for example, we were looking at requests to look at copper theft in the rails, in the railways, which is potentially doable, but requires a resolution and revisit time that is challenging. Similarly to the footpaths. Okay, so you know, another one of our Neo Frontiers calls that should be funded this year is around building an AI roadmap, on the realization that we actually need to try and put mechanisms into place to enable the EO community, in addition to SANSA, to use AI on a much more frequent and widespread basis. All right, that's good. Please continue to put ideas in there. We will also need to, okay, I think that's good. Excellent. Sorry, I forgot we had a third one for this. So again, if you have ideas about capability that sit on one side or another of the 1 meter resolution divide, it would be super useful for us to get that information. Okay, good. So please go and continue to fill this in if you can. Oh, okay, right. Sorry. We were using this one as opposed to the continuous graph for this one. And of course, if you wish to comment on thermal aspects with regard to heat islands, then, for example, then, also just try and capture it here if you have any ideas in that regard, even though it would be at probably a higher resolution or lower resolution rather. Okay, informal fires would have to be pushing it to quite a high resolution. Good. Okay, so I think we will sadly have to move on again. So maybe Kui, we can move over to disaster management. Post the link. There we go. Okay, smoke and informal settlements. That will also translate into the atmospheric side of things. The smoke might actually, the cumulative smoke might be easier to detect than the fires themselves. All right, let's go over to disaster management. Otherwise, we're going to start stealing more of your time than we're allowed to. Okay, the link to disaster management is posted in there. And, again, if you go back to our infra-eco, disaster management is certainly one of the areas where the climate change, extreme event, ecological infrastructure, and built infrastructure, certainly, you need all of that information with extensive observations, both across time and the event scale, and a predictive capability to fully realize the value. So yeah, I'd encourage you to please get stuck into the downstream and intelligence for disaster management. Okay, dam wall, that's good. Flood, yeah, so one of the interesting takes from the expert advisory group was the idea of a fairly high resolution flood climatology. Yeah, thank you, Declan. That's very good thinking. So, we in the ecosystems, it was a very good point was made that it should be a kind of biome versus intervention. So in terms of risk, vulnerability, and capacity, it's also about identifying those things and also thinking about, well, what intervention is possible. Declan, if you wish to open your mic and comment on the specifics, please feel free.
Thank you, Stuart. Maybe just to speak as the colleagues are placing their input, just to give you the lay of the landscape. The idea is to understand the behavior of several things when you're looking at disaster management. First of all, the hazard, how it behaves over time. So tracking the hazard, and very closely linked to that is vulnerability, because you have disasters that occur in areas that might not receive much impact from the hazard, but because they're vulnerable in nature, such as informal housing, they get washed away in flooding and windstorms. So those two are related. So vulnerability is really around different kinds of indices, social, economic, technological, and then to mitigate, and this is what creates the resilience for community, the ability to respond and adapt over time. So adaptation and capacity building or capacity is reduces the risk. So if you have a high fire danger index map and you have communities that are within that, the capacity to respond would be fire stations and fire vehicles and trained personnel. So that's more on the social side. So I know that you might not be able to, you'd be very limited from a capacity perspective, but maybe looking at the entire three concepts all together will give you a better idea of how to formulate something from a disaster management. Currently, the country is having a lot of flooding. And so the question we want to know is where are these areas of high flooding in terms of magnitude? How many sort of hectares is the water covering? And if there's sluices open, we want to know which area of the riverine system is flooded. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Declan. Okay, thanks, Herman. Okay, so yeah, Natasha's point is very well made. So as I said in one of the other thematics, you know, this is very much a preliminary idea of where the solution spaces might lie. And once we actually look towards implementation, we would then go in for a much deeper dive in terms of the user requirements. You know, so one aspect of that is what in EO you call the semantic requirement, which talks about the interface that is used for the user to receive products, knowledge, you know, metrics, whatever, and how they actually gain meaning from that. So obviously, because we're looking at such a wide programmatic aspect right now, we can't go into those details. But we certainly will have to once we start looking to the actual implementation. And certainly that at that stage, we will need to prioritize. So, you know, for example, for disaster management, you know, Declan would have to, and the rest of the disaster management community would have to advise us in an iterative way as to, you know, where are the low-hanging fruit, and you know, and build upon a first order kind of implementation.
Stuart, one of those low-hanging fruit are the APHIS system and how we can make that better for the country.
Right.
And by better, we mean, you know, the country, each sort of geographical space has a fire contingency plan. There's fire legislation. We look at how we can bring those softer things into the tool from a compliance perspective.
Right.
The Neisner fires were as a result of not looking after the fire landscape. So things like biomass indicators, compliance measures being implemented. So sort of like a very good monitoring tool as well.
Yeah. But I think, Declan, it also shows that, you know, increasingly in EO, we know that when you develop these kind of information and knowledge systems, the users have to be completely embedded in the development and part of the development team. Otherwise, we run the risk of doing what we've done in the past to some degree, which is, you know, developing what we think the users need as opposed to what they actually need.
Yeah, so yeah, point taken, Stuart. I think that what we need to do is, because it's already developed, we can look at a phased improvement of it. And, you know, over time, you automatically capturing the user requirements.
Yeah.
Within that. So we're making the tool better because you don't do a big bang approach, collecting user requirements and then developing this, and then the whole fire legislation changes and there's no, there's no more fire protection agencies with the same authority and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. We're getting lots of information. Okay, Natasha, that's good. Some democracy. Thank you, Saxon. Okay, I think we'll have to move on. Before we leave disaster management, please, let's just take a few minutes and see, are there any very compelling needs that potentially aren't captured with regard to actual sensors? So we know for disaster management that, for example, flooding, currently the first thing we do is try and task as much of the commercial sensor suite that we have access to, both on the SAR and the optical side. So certainly we would hope that having our own suite of reasonably high-res optical sensors, and there's another discussion going on around the technology, which is, are you trying to put up a few sensors that are agile and are taskable, or are you trying to put up more satellites that require systematic measurements? And we don't have the time and space to open that particular box. But, and certainly disaster management is one of the areas where latency is, critical.
Colleagues and Dr. Stewart, maybe I'm also going to add the comment that, we can sort of piggyback off other data sets and resolution types. So our need is sort of relationally linked to other sectors. And these sectors would be housing, these sectors would be water, the social system, and just something not humorous, but something to note. I mean, we had one of the lots of fatalities in the reports that we're getting now from the provinces is water baptisms that are happening in rivers, and the poor people are drowning. So there's very soft issues and there's very hard issues. So we find ourselves in both places.
Okay, all right. I see we're not capturing much here, but that's fine, because I think the expert advisory groups have already captured quite a significant amount of information. So last chance, if you wish to put anything into this one. I mean, it will remain open. And I think let us move on to atmosphere and climate. And the link is in the chat. I'm not sure how many atmospheric specialists we have left. Okay, I see Rebecca isn't here. Okay, please put your hand up if you consider yourself to be an atmospheric specialist that I don't know of. Oh, excellent. Solomon and Robert. Oh, I see Herman is not there. Hang on a second. So, Robert, I've allowed you to talk, and Solomon too. So maybe start with Robert, Maisha. Robert, do you want to just give us your thoughts just for a minute or so on, where you see the priorities?
Thank you, Doc, and thank you also to colleagues. Yeah, I mean, in atmospheric science, remember, we focus on a variety of topics. We have weather prediction, we have remote sensing, we have got climate change. So there are so many things that we do, and we also work with probably built environment, because when we run the models, there are some information that we use from that side. And also from agriculture, the model also use information that is related to moisture. So from satellite point of view, I work in the data assimilation group, meaning for the model to do proper data assimilation, we make use of all those soundings from satellites, and also information from the radar, and also information from the surface observation. So there are so many things that we actually require. And also the spatial distribution and temporal distribution should be at some point as high as maybe like for weather observation, 5 minutes input data. So there are so many things that I can talk about, but I will wait for others to comment on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Solomon, please tell us your thoughts.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can, thank you.
All right, thank you. My name is Solomon. I'm a Ghanaian, and it's nice to be part of this program. And thank you for giving us opportunity to make various comments. I think Robert has said something related to that. Well, with atmospheric science, basically I'm into GNSS receivers and simulations of the ionospheric models. And what I would say is that basically we always think of, we have the impact of Robert was talking about the climate and then weather effect. Basically, these are most of the phenomena that occur within the troposphere, right? But basically, whatever we expect, any topological processes that affect the upper atmosphere is less regarded. And then also we have to look at the impact of what is coming up towards down. So I've been working basically on effect of atmospheric waves, maybe gravity waves, planetary waves, tides, effect on various ionospheric and then middle atmosphere phenomena, because these phenomena also affect a little bit of whatever is being used, because basically recently people are into large farm cultivation using GNSS receivers to drive their farm mechanizations to work. And also people also work with machine learning programs to able to input climate model data, able to predict, as Robert rightly said, 5 minutes of reducing the resolutions of the prediction so they can have an accurate prediction in the future. So I think it's laudable, and then I'm so happy to share this idea. So thank you so much. I also lead my colleagues to also say something.
Thanks very much, Solomon. So, one of the more ambitious hyperspectral missions in new space, the name escapes me at the moment, is looking at both visible and sphere hyper to actually look at, for example, things like pipeline emissions, gas emissions, etc. So, that is also something that's worth considering, but obviously that's very technically demanding from a sensor perspective. Okay, gridded observations, high-res topography, good. Okay, if we can just briefly move over to this, we know from the discussion with the EAG that, the atmospheric requirements are very different, at least in terms of emissions, greenhouse gases, particulates, etc. And it's quite low resolution, but a very, very high temporal frequency. So, and it occupies more like, this kind of space here. So it's possibly a little unlikely that South Africa would be building an atmospheric focused mission, obviously because that those kind of observations don't have a huge amount of overlap with many of the other thematic centers. So I think unless anyone wishes again to put some specifics in there with regard to either new missions or access to existing or planned missions that we don't currently have, I suggest we move on to the last thematic. And
Stuart, it was Heidi who made a comment on experience with atmospheric corrections. So I don't know if you want to maybe give her a chance just to make some input.
Yeah. Herman made me co-host, so I can now let rip. Stand by, Heidi, if I can find you there. Okay, Heidi, you want to comment on that?
Sorry, there was a disconnectivity between the network for a moment, Stuart, so I didn't hear your question. Can you please repeat it for me, please?
Yes, sorry. So you said you were talking about the air conditioning. No, the atmospheric correction.
I wish I had air conditioning as well, yeah.
Me too. So I don't know if you want to just comment any further on that.
Yeah, I think, Stuart, we have a big need for the hyperspectral data that becomes available for the Gauteng multi-sensor campaign to have software to do atmospheric correction of those. So remember, we used to have ATCOR at the CSIR, but we use it so infrequently that we would have to have alternatives. So either that gets pre-processed by the company that provides it compared to us as users or intermediate users to actually process it. But when we get to the Sentinel sensors, obviously the free software such as Snap is available and already being used and easy to use. So I don't know if other users have a similar need, that when we get to the hyperspectral and high spatial resolution images that those, yeah, I don't know if SANSA can facilitate that atmospheric correction or offer free software, a tool that will facilitate that for us. So we don't always have to have these high maintenance costs on software that is being used infrequently. And then when I see there's a note being posted about a digital innovation model. Yeah, that would be really nice, but obviously one that has been generated from LiDAR data or interpolated. At one of the wetland, I think it was the wetlands in Daba last year in October, one person investigated the comparison between the different available DEMs, the 90 meter, the 30 meter SRTM, and then the Stellenbosch DEM, and those that are interpolated from the 5 meter interval contours. And it showed that it is still very, it interpolates too crudely through river-based systems and wetlands. And so for that application, anything related to the wetlands, and I heard Mark Thompson also speaking about the dams, we definitely need to improve on having something that is more spatially accurate and representative for those narrow and small systems. I'm sorry, I don't know if I went a bit too off track and whether I answered the question.
Oh, no, Heidi, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The question about software already came up, and we had a joking suggestion that if we got our file formats right and added a toolbox to Snap, then that would actually be the best thing to do. Anyway, okay, we've got a little bit off track. I see we are gathering information still, so that's great. I think what we're going to do now is switch over to the minerals and mining. And I'm very happy to see that Gabby has been very patient and stayed with us. So let's go over to the minerals and mining. Gabby, do you want to kind of give us some first thoughts about the downstream and intelligence and where you would be seeing the value and how to frame the thinking?
Hi, Stuart. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. Basically, when it comes to minerals and mining, you're looking at two kinds of things. You're looking at just mapping of the mineralogy, which is not temporarily controlled. So you can work with archive data there. And then you've got the component that is temporarily important, such as monitoring your mine dumps and, you know, for landslides and I would say monitoring the progress of a mining site is very important temporarily. So you might not need the most spectrally diverse for those kinds of applications, but for mapping minerals and so on, we need higher spectral diversity in specifically SWIR for alteration minerals and things like that. So if we could have a Sentinel-2 or an Aster combined, that would be great, just to give better capability in those kinds of areas. Then thermal also plays a really good role in mineral mapping, because we see a different kind of mineral in that area that we can't pick up with the SWIR. So we have Aster that has got 90-meter resolution, which is terrible. So if you want to do a more regional based study of thermal related minerals, that's okay. But if you want to do a localized study on that, it's fairly impossible actually, but I know it's a very expensive camera. So that's basically, you know, just based on mapping minerals, that's the way to go. Then the other components related to mining and energy is obviously your acid mine drainage, your secondary things that you would like, that you're interested in. So acid mine drainage, the illegal small scale mining, not just the illegal ones, just normal small scale mining monitoring is really important for environmental studies. Also assisting in the rehabilitation. So I would say DEM is also really important here, because you need to understand your landscape. Yeah, so it depends on what you're looking at, and it's actually quite a diverse field. So yeah. Then subsidence also plays a role here. So if we know where the dolomitic areas are and, you know, high rainfall, like in Centurion, we have a big sinkhole at the N1. That's a big problem. So predicting sinkholes is not so simple, but groundwater is also very important in that kind of area. I just thought of something else now. Okay, just give me a moment. But if you'd like to comment on that, Stuart, I can just continue maybe.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Gabby. That's very useful. So I think most of that we have captured in the EAG. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you're looking at a thematic where obviously the mining requirement is quite different to the mineral requirement, and the energy requirement is something that we haven't really actually had a look at, because we haven't been able to interact with the right kind of expertise. So, you know, and that goes off to anything from, you know, oil and gas to offshore to all the renewables, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we do run the risk of, I mean, it's similar with atmosphere and climate, you know, you're actually talking about putting too many things in the same basket. But I think if we looked at, so the SWIR is, that's also an interesting one from a technical perspective, but you would need effectively a kind of hyper SWIR, Gabby, or could you get away with a few well-placed bands?
I think you could get away with a few well-placed bands. If you just look at the literature, which bands they use the most, and especially which minerals are the best indicator minerals to look for, then yeah, you can fine tune which bands might provide the most value.
Right, and hopefully they overlap with the atmospheric need for various gases, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. But I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So
the illegal mining thing, people are also interested in tracking that for exploration purposes because they're doing your prospecting for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we did discuss that, not for that reason.
Yeah.
In the EAG. And again, you might be looking at indirect things like, you know, temporary dwellings or footpaths or, you know, in critical areas. So, you know, would it be fair to say that the mining, the primary mining application is really on, you know, site and impact monitoring?
Yes, I'd say so. And for that, each mine would just maybe have their drones or get their radar that they place on their mining sites and monitor it themselves because of the high resolution requirement for that. So they would likely do that on site by themselves. But for us, you know, exploration of the whole country, it's really important. And if we want to provide really good geological maps with exploration prospectivity, you know, targets, to do that faster, we can really use, you know, an astrotype Sentinel-2. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thanks, Gabby. I think, unfortunately, we may not have that many mining and mineral or even energy specialists with us.
Yeah, so, a lot of what was mentioned in the previous thematic areas has good overlap with what we require. So at least I'll put some few things in there. So we'll just, you know, whatever is there, we'll grab.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I see Shishikawi has got a hand up. So please give us your thoughts for a minute or two. I've allowed you to, I've opened your mic.
Afternoon, everyone. It's Shishikawi Papuli here from ESCOM. I just want to share some of our application with in terms of remote sensing from energy generation point of view. Most of the things, obviously, like what Gaby said, we have discussed them. However, we do have a lot of remote sensing application that we use in our space, starting from phase one, stage one, where we need to identify the corridor, where it's more about the environmental applications. And then we look at the geotechnical studies as well as the land surface stability issues such as erosion, such as dolomite, such as formation of sinkholes and other things, including the floods and the meteorological aspect of it. Obviously, areas that have got a lot of tornadoes is an area that are very much vulnerable to our operations in a way that a tower can actually collapse. Therefore, if it's a critical one, we risk these days the chances of load shedding if it falls under the critical classification. And going forward, after everything, most of the operations in terms of remote sensing is in monitoring and maintenance. So there, again, we talk about the floods, we talk about the fire, and then we talk about different climate variables, such as areas with drought, where we've got hydro power generations, then it poses a lot of risk as well as vulnerability to our operations. And one of the things that maybe probably it will be, I'm hoping in future, the Earth observation will be able to assist. It's in terms of in terms of copper theft that include the tower member theft, of which recently we've been risking a lot of towers that are collapsing due to members being stolen, and thereby also causing a risk in within the settlement, especially to the children, where we find that the children end up actually experiencing fatalities because you've got all the cables in the ground due to such activities. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you very much, Chisikawe. That's very useful information. So, you know, it also makes us think about if we look at the disaster monitoring and that kind of risk, vulnerability, exposure, you know, it's also possible to think of effectively a similar approach, but from a time series perspective, to look at infrastructure builds, you know, that kind of thing, which is not a subject we've kind of, you know, looked at in this workshop so much. So yeah, thank you. That's super useful. Okay, so I think, okay, we've still got some ideas coming in, which is good. I think we've run out of time. So what I suggest we do is, you know, please post any last questions. In the Q&A, and I think, you know, I'd just like to kind of go into a bit of a wrap up. So let me just go back to this. So first of all, just to say, you know, thank you all very much. You know, you've given us a lot to think about, some really good ideas. Particular thanks to the EAD members who we have now stolen a full day from you. So, you know, that's very much appreciated. And I think, and you know, please offer dissent if I'm interpreting this in the way that I'd wish to, but I'm seeing ongoing support for this multi-thematic approach that looks at variations of you know, risk and vulnerability, you know, whether it's from a disaster management perspective or whether it's from an agricultural or a marine or an infrastructure perspective, as being really what SANSA should be aiming for with the SIH. You know, and part of the thinking behind that is, what can SANSA do that enables others and allows it to build the greatest value while staying in its lane, which is also part of the thinking behind this kind of infra-eco aspect. So yeah, I would hope you would agree with me that having this approach and the modular community-based development around this is the way to offer the greatest value from a downstream and intelligence perspective. And, you know, the other thing I'm seeing is that this in terms of the actual mission gaps that we're seeing here, that, you know, again, this kind of confirms that there are some of these spaces here, you know, if we're forced to, for example, focus on one preliminary mission, a constellation, that, you know, these kind of spaces are ones that are offering a great deal of value, but are also importantly highly multi-thematic. And that's important because we can then look at a mission that provides a great spread of value in addition to in-depth value. and also mitigates the risk of development. Because obviously if you're developing a mission that is based around a very, very particular application, that carries a great deal more risk of lack of impact. So anyway, those are my take-home messages from the session. And what we'll try and do is provide the kind of raw information from the session on some kind of public platform as soon as possible. So the slides, the Jamboards, and hopefully the recording if we've got it. And then we'll look at producing a synthesis in probably 3 to 6 months' time. And the idea is to produce a broader synthesis that's available as a report, but also to publish it, for example, in a journal like Space Policy or something like that. So I would just, any panelists who wish to add any further comments or people who wish to add any further questions, here's your last chance.
Stuart, if I may.
Please, Gabby.
I'd just like to say, I think this is really, really great what you're doing. Having all this input from all these thematic areas and trying to narrow down, getting best value for money and keeping everybody happy. So I think this is a really, really good exercise that you guys are doing. Well done.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Gabby. And thank you, for your own contributions, which have been, hugely valuable. Declan, please.
Thanks, Dr. Stewart. I think also I just want to say thanks from the disaster management sector. Obviously, disaster management needs are quite diverse and large, all requiring data and expert input and user requirements. But I think this is a great start. But I also wanted to add that whatever low-hanging fruit we can get that involves satellite imagery, we must move ahead to do it.
Yeah.
Because the sector requires that now. And, we're in all sorts of agreements, MOAs, MOUs, international disaster charters. And before you know it, our principals are going to be asking us, so why are we in these agreements when we're not sort of bringing forth the benefit? I think APHIS is a good way to at least get it out to provinces, provincial disaster management centers in their dock operations, bring it into the NDMC data platform, big data platform, so that we can actually have something that starts the discussion around satellite data. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Declan. So yeah, as you say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? Not the talking about it. So, obviously what we need to do is synthesize this in a way that allows it to be quantitatively used going forward. So that's still actually a lot of work on our side. But I would hope that if we are starting to look at SIH actual implementation, in other words, the financial resources becoming available sometime in the next few months, if we're lucky, obviously our starting point in the downstream is to look at something like that infra ecosystem and start looking at the low-hanging fruit across the sectors, in which case, I'm sorry to say, we'll be knocking on your doors again, because we'll need then to start looking at setting up a more detailed requirement. And this is obviously using the existing sensors. And we know that, we're really not using them in anywhere near their highest value at the moment. So I would hope, by the middle of this year, we'll be starting to look at the design from a multi-thematic and also a specific perspective of how to start creating those downstream systems, so we can actually be looking at something that has really tangible results and impact and benefit. So yeah, thanks, Declan. Okay, all right. I think if we have no other comments, thanks very much to Mark. Thanks very much to everyone who also contributed and was willing to discuss. And yeah, you'll be hearing from us again. Thank you all very much. And we will close the session now.
Thank you.